What we are, the self, is absolute being. Being is consciousness, and being is bliss. Its nature is truth, its nature is knowledge, and it is infinite. It is one, only, invariable, and it is that which alone is. Ignorance which has no existence apart from the self, for the self is only one, appears to cast a veil over that single, truthful self. When there is the veil, there is the projection of the unreal, which is characterized by multiplicity. To remove the delusion and thereby eliminate all duality, and thus abide in the fullness and perfection of the bliss of the self, Sri Bhagavan has given the instruction to inquire, who am I? Why, who am I? Because what you regard as your identity is of paramount importance. Although the inquiry, who am I, can be used in one sense for a variety of goals, such as the submergence or removal of thought, or withdrawal of the senses from their objects, and such. It is of paramount importance, the inquiry, because it deals with your identity. What we regard as our identity goes into the makeup entirely of how we regard anything, even the view that there is anything to be regarded. The identity is the key. And the inquiry, who am I, is the introspective search to know your identity as it is. It is non-objective by way of method, because your identity, the truth of the self, is non-objective. What you are can never be a known object, nor can it be an unknown object. You cannot be an object, whether that object be gross or subtle, something sensed or something conceived. When you inquire, therefore, to know the self, you must actually inquire to know the self, and not be preoccupied with other non-existent things. Plunge inward to know what your actual being is. The negation as not this, as stated in the Upanishads, is also for the purpose of revealing what your actual existence or identity is. Loosely we speak of becoming that by virtue of such inquiry and meditation. But really, this is not a becoming of anything. It is the realization through knowledge of that which is unborn, ever attained, and when known with its own innate knowledge, ever revealed. It is the clarification of one's own identity, which is the essence of knowledge, that is the real fruit of any spiritual practice. And it is that to which self-knowledge, or the path of inquiry, well, it deals with that exclusively. Let us consider the case of devotion. What happens? First, the identity in relation to objects is dissolved. The attachment to things is dissolved. Then is lost or surrendered the fruits of one's actions to the degree they pertain to oneself. And then in such devotion, the idea of being the performer of action is lost. Clearly you can see the dissolution of the false identity in this. Then the very idea of the life of the body, the senses, and being the enjoyer or maneuverer of the senses is dissolved. It is relinquished. Then being the mind and the buddhi which decides, or intellect which decides where the mind moves, is surrendered. At last and finally, the very individual notion of existing distinct from God in any way is abandoned. You see it as the same dissolution of identity, of false identity. When we inquire, who am I? We go directly into what is our identity and relinquishing what is not our identity. This is called the discrimination between the self and the not self. If you consider whatever it is you regard as an obstruction or some kind of obstacle or a chasm or barrier between you and self-realization, if you consider that deeply, you will see it is not so much the thing, the thought, the pattern of thought that seems to be between you and the truth, but rather the identity, however formed, by whatever qualities characterized, of the you that is apart from the self that has this wall or obstruction. Do you see what's being pointed out? To remove the wall or obstruction, or to hop over it, you have only to inquire as to who it is, what makes up the identity of the one who's apparently bound, separated, divided from the truth. The realization of truth is non-dual. How can it be non-dual in your experience unless there is the utter elimination of the assumption, the false supposition of existing as an individual entity? Unless there is, as the Maharshi points out in Saddarshanam, that elimination of that I, how will the truth be known? The truth alone can know the truth. Consciousness alone can realize consciousness. Another cannot do so. In non-dual truth, that which is realized and the realizer are identical. This means they are one and the same thing, not two things of equal quality. As long as the individual is taken to be real, how can there be this realization? If an inquiry is made as to who is this that is styled as I, how could there be a state of non-realization? There are never two I's. instruction along lines of a higher self and a lower self, a self and the supreme self, an ego self and the true self, are for purposes of aiding the aspirant for realization, not a statement of concrete fact. What is true is that the existence or real being of the self is always one and can never be divided. Duality, even so slight as the idea of I and that, is merely made of illusion. It's just delusion. It's imagination. The cessation of such imagination is knowledge. So determine your identity, and you will find yourself bodiless, without a mind, without senses, without prana, without beginning, without end, without anything or any quality whatsoever. But perfectly full as ever unchanging existence. If you have a question this morning, at any point, feel free to ask. If you want to relate your own experience, at any point, feel free to speak.
I've been trying to look into the core to see what is there. And the first thing I see is that still do I hold the world as real. Looking at that, I understand that means, what that really means is I hold the individual as real. And that fundamentally what is called for is continue the inquiry. Discrimination of reality continues to go on, of course, at the same time as the inquiry. And from other reading I've been doing of commentary on Shankar's Crest Jewel, I understand a little more deeply, at least one way of looking at reality. What is has no existence in itself. And in terms of being and identity, it's clear that, again, the body depends on the consciousness, the mind depends on the consciousness, the sense of identity depends on the consciousness. The consciousness does not depend upon anything. So I think, again, reality is pointing to, I think, with some clarity from the discrimination, but still what is needed at this point is not more discrimination, but rather more inquiry.
Let your discrimination and your inquiry become identical. The self is not a particular thing, it is the existence. The existence of another is a notion based upon some attribute, some characteristic, regarded as your identity. When you discern your identity, you truly discriminate as to what is real and what is not. You started by saying you still regarded the world as real. Rather than try to decide the world is real, the world is unreal. You can very directly inquire, who is it that sees the world? If there then still remains the idea that there is a world, you need to further inquire as to who it is that sees the world. The seen is always the same as the seer. What do you take yourself to be at the moments when you say there is a world? You don't say that there's a world continuously, such as when you're deep asleep. But sometimes, especially in the waking state, you say that there is a world. What goes into the makeup of that so-called perception? Really, it is only a conception. What goes into the makeup of it? Something must be regarded as you before you say it is. Discern that, discriminate there. The determination of real or unreal of a world that is not of supreme significance. But it is important to the extent that it involves your identity. Those who know the self declare the truth of no creation. Those who do not know the self and believe there is a creation are themselves not really created. Therefore, we should inquire to see, are we some created objective thing? Do we have these attributes, such as being a perceiver, a conceiver, a thinker, a sensor, a body, and so forth? Or do these have nothing to do with us?
From your discourse today, I see more clearly progression of misidentities from the body. If I'm the body, the world is real to me. If I'm the senses, the body is real to me, and so forth, all the way up to I'm the thinker. I don't know that I have a question. It's a thank you, actually. Thank you for that. There's more to look at here, to be sure. And from the thinker, who believes they're the thinker.
Perhaps you see more clearly now why the Maharshi has stated so many times that all the thoughts are for I. They all trace back to a root notion of I. That I may seem to be endowed with a mind, with senses, with a body. Those are the shapes it takes on. But there must be someone, apparently, who takes on those shapes, takes on those definitions. So we should liberate ourselves from all these extraneous definitions and even the notion of I that is also extraneous to our nature. And then we see the unchanging existence, the pure consciousness that we've really been the entire time. That's seen, bondage is over, suffering can be no more.
You know, I just woke up right before coming here, essentially. So Limala called me this morning at 9:30 saying, "Are you coming over?" And I said, "No, I can't because I just woke up." And anyway, so I usually don't wake up very quickly. And so usually by the time I get here, at least I'm somewhat awake, whereas right now, I'm sort of barely awake.
Half awake, half asleep.
Yeah.
Must be the Jagrat Sushupti. The sages talk of.
In between states.
The waking deep sleep.
But I guess it comes down to, I was thinking about this. Wouldn't it be so cool to be able to know that I don't ever change states? Because it's so dependent on my mental, my mind changes, and I believe I change.
Well, what makes you say you change states? You were a witness of the sleeping state. You're now witnessing the waking state. What changes happened for you? There's been a change in the appearance of what is objective, which is merely imagined within the mind itself. But what changes happened for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because that gives a little more clarity, because if I depended all on the mental faculty, then that obviously disappears.
Do you depend on the mental faculty? What do you regard as you?
because because a mental faculty is the commonality.
No, it's different when your mental faculties are different in the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep.
And even in the waking states, it gets modified pretty easily.
Very easily. Moreover, you can see these things change slowly or quickly, as you noticed this morning. The speed at which they change does not in any way alter the state or nature of your existence. This is true for waking, dreaming, and sleep states, as well as any kind of mental mode within those states. That which is changeful is not yourself. And rapidity of change has got nothing to do with the self.
If I would oscillate back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Some may like it slow, some may like it fast. It has no bearing on the self. So you did not arrive at the waking state at 9:30 this morning. I assume that's what you meant when you said you just got here. You just got to the waking state.
Yeah, I just got to the waking state.
You were not in sleep. You are not now in a waking state. These states appear only within you. And you cannot be anything that appears within them.
Yeah, because those things change, get modified radically. Anything in those states gets completely modified.
Yes. And they are in those states, and you are not in the states. You cannot simultaneously be the ever-present existence and something within those modifying, changeful states. You cannot simultaneously be the formless real being and some imagined form within a state of mind. And it is not possible for you to abandon your own existence. This is a matter of experience for everyone. Since you cannot abandon your real being, and being is undivided, utterly indivisible, how could you be anything that ever appears in any state of mind?
So I was just thinking that last Friday, I had a very good experience, and I'm seeing more clearly that the discrimination has to be clearer, and that I can't, because I'm still dependent on the state of mind, because it seemed like it felt like that meditation that Friday went throughout, or seemed similar to yesterday. And I was meditating right before I went to bed. And obviously, it wasn't deep enough to go through any state, right? Because it was modified.
In what way did you undergo modification?
I'm just saying what I believe to be myself.
That'll always undergo modification.
Yeah.
But does yourself undergo modification? And if your meditation be upon the self, it is of the self, and it will not be modified. What actually is the substance of meditation?
Well, the substance is always the same. The substance of, you couldn't even do a meditation if you didn't have that substance.
And that substance is pure consciousness. It's the end of the meditation, or the fruit of meditation. It's the substance of meditation. It's the essence. It's what enables the illumination of meditation to even happen. Does that consciousness disappear when you're dreaming or when you're sleeping? If you misidentify with the mind in the waking state or a particular part of it, then that's going to undergo change or destruction when there's a change of state of mind, such as dreaming and sleep. And how meditation can be continuous seems elusive. You grab it, but it seems to slip away. It's all a matter of what you regard as your identity. Are you someone, a traveler in the waking state, or in the dreaming state, or in the sleep state? Or are you the substrate or space in which these appear falsely? The substrate does not move. The space of consciousness is not modified. Identify only with the space of consciousness. Do not take yourself to be an illusory part.
This is very, just very deep. And it seems like what is occurring right now is an inquiry. So, as you discussed, it's really seeing clearly what you're not. And this is sort of what you're describing to me in clear terms, right? What I'm not and what I was taking myself to be.
Discarding what you're not, what you were taking yourself to be, using that discrimination, something is remaining, solid and clear. It is the knowledge itself. It is also your being or consciousness. So the self or Brahman is described as Satchidananda, being consciousness bliss, as well as Satyam-Jnanam-Anantam, the true or truth, knowledge, infinity. You yourself, your being consciousness, which is also bliss, is the infinite knowledge, the infinite truth.
So to know this infinite truth, because I'm so used to at least having a sattvic mind, but obviously my mind seems like it's gone from, I guess, tamasic to sattvic during this conversation.
That which knows the change from one guna to the other is itself beyond the gunas. Beyond the gunas. You saw sleep, you saw waking, you saw tamas, darkness or inertia, you saw sattva. Who is this you? The one who silently witnessed all this was not participating in it. To know the truth, abandon the idea of being a distinct one who does not know. You will not remain over as one who does know. We only loosely speak of a jnani. You are the knowledge itself. The knowledge is the only knower. That's pure consciousness. You cannot separate yourself from consciousness in order to get a grasp on it. But if you abandon the false assumption of individuality, you can be said to grasp the truth fully, because you yourself are that truth.
So the understanding, because you just said that you're not going to be a knower of truth, but you will know directly.
Because truth is not inert, but of the nature of pure consciousness. So it knows itself. It alone knows itself. A so-called other cannot know it. The so-called other does not actually exist. It is not who you are. With the identity as another, there can be no perfect knowledge. Without that false identity, just abiding as the self itself, there can be no ignorance.
Thank you, Master. In giving instruction, when you mentioned taking a meditation, say that the world is unreal, but not making that an obstacle, because the essential would be to know your identity. It made me feel a little bit like hearing the Maharshi's image that the seeker should be like the diver seeking air. That you go to where the light is, or where you have the room to find it, and you don't get entangled in anything, because it's so urgent, it's so important. So that if I was meditating that the world was unreal and it seemed to take me deeper, that would be great. And if it didn't, I first have to find my identity and never turn something that is meant as a propulsion for me into an obstacle. And it also felt like it was a little bit akin to non-attachment, not being the doer, identified as the doer in activity. The whole thing seemed to have this feeling that, well, maybe in some other traditions they sometimes might say, call it not clinging or choiceless. It felt very free to have that proper goal orientation towards finding identity.
if we take statements of wisdom, the statement that the world is unreal, is a statement of fact, of truth. If we take this and make it only a mental opinion that we argue about in our minds, hopefully not with other people, but that too, I guess, argue about it, you have to ask yourself, how is that assisting in self-realization? It does not even assist in understanding what the wise mean when they say the world is unreal. It is not a matter of convincing ourselves to formulate the right opinion in our minds, but rather always a matter of knowing who we are. Then we see the truth of such statements plainly. They're self-evident. Meditation on the world being unreal. You said you wanted to make sure this didn't become an obstacle. How could it ever be an obstacle? But if you're going to get to the depths of it, what it means, you have to go in and know yourself. You must look at the perceiver. It's not that meditating on the unreality of the world could ever be an obstruction to one's spiritual practice. It's just that if you didn't do it in the light of inquiry, it wouldn't go nearly deep enough.
The Maharishi seems to take that theme a little in some of the 40 verses where he advises that rather than argue whether it's with form, without form, it's the delight that all would appreciate is the bliss of the self, where there is no ego.
So then we know from that instruction that the prime thing is to abide in the egoless state and know the self directly. If we know the self, we know what is real. It does not mean that we should try to convince ourselves within our minds of an objective opinion. And it certainly does not mean that we should remain with the old opinion, such as the world is real. The meaning is clear. We should inquire deeply and thereby find out what the wise have meant when they've stated facts as they are.
Just one last point. What you're saying reminds me that the sages are sort of giving a preview of what the scenery might be from the vision of truth, but that this is not something you should be, hankering for its own sake, almost like references to the bliss of the self. The seeker isn't saying, well, where's my bliss, where's my bliss? The seeker is asking, who am I? Having been guided with that preview that can be helpful, but not turning that into a diversion.
Again, it does not really represent a difficulty. There aren't really these dangers on the path.
Okay.
If someone in the expounding of truth or giving of spiritual instruction has a greater purpose than previews or coming attractions. The purpose of spiritual instruction, as the Maharishi has said, is to restore the mind to its proper place, the mind that has wandered away and taken on an identity separate from the self. So the purpose of spiritual instruction, even as it is given, let alone when it's reflected upon and meditated upon deeply, is to cause the seeker to experience firsthand his own identity, to abide as the self, even then and there. It's not really a preview. Nor is there much danger. Let us say someone hears about eternal bliss and starts asking, where's my bliss, where's my bliss? It doesn't seem to be there. This will lead on to a deeper inquiry. Where is bliss anyway? Because the seeker's saying, where? The wise are saying, here. Okay, the wise are saying it is, and the one who's still in ignorance is saying, I don't know, I don't see it. This will lead on to a deeper inquiry as to where exactly is this bliss to be found. If it is already existing, why don't I experience it? When that question is raised, that why, it will lead back to an understanding of one's identity. Then he'll set about clarifying his identity. Seeing no danger, it's only helped.
The clarifying use of the incorrect identity.
Right. To gain a clear knowledge of one's identity, of one's real existence. Then bliss is recovered. The desire for the bliss has led to such inquiry. So you see, the path to self-realization is not tricky. It's not fraught with pits and potholes. But it does have to be subjective, non-objective.
So what I'm gathering is that you think that even trying to understand that it's irrelevant to consider whether the world is real or not. That really the path is the inner deepening.
Yes, it is irrelevant, but the identity that goes into the belief it is real, it is unreal, the identity that goes into taking such a stand is very relevant. So on the one hand, the Maharshi has pointed out in Saddarshanam to discuss whether the world is real or unreal, happiness or not, and so forth is vain. You need to inquire and know the self. I'm paraphrasing the verse. And who am I, he says, as long as the world is regarded as real, there will not be self-realization. How do you put the two statements together? It must be with your own identity. So if we continue thinking to any degree, the world is actually existing, the world is real, from what position do we say the world is? From what unexamined misidentification are we taking that view? If we don't abandon that view through knowledge and merely try to convince ourselves the world is unreal, while the effort is noble, it won't bring about the fruit of practice that's desired. If, however, we do inquire and uproot that false definition, then we will know what is meant by Brahman alone is real, the world is not. So whenever we consider these matters as objective topics removed from our own nature, they do become quite irrelevant to liberation. If they cause us to question our own definition and uproot the false identity, then it becomes very relevant. Do you see?
Yes, I see. Thank you.
Good job.
You said a couple Fridays ago, you said that any inquiry, all inquiries are fruitful or beneficial. There is no bad inquiry. You said, well, I've said that many times, but I've never heard you say that. So that's the first time I ever heard it. And then, so what I'm hearing you say is what you were just saying just recently, that whenever we ask, who am I, there's this process of dissolution is occurring of ignorance. Whether I think it's actually dissolving or not, it is in fact occurring. And you were saying also that it's not, the path is not fraught with difficulty. Yet it does require us to be persistent, our practice. And if the mind is lazy, it perceives it as difficulty. Because so it's encouraging for me to hear when you say there is no bad inquiry, because it allows me to be more persistent in a way of ease rather than in a way of conflict, perceived difficulty or perceived resistance to. Because sometimes I'm hanging out in the I. I'm asking, who am I? I'm in this I. And I'm wanting to move into bliss, and the mind is somehow there's just that place I reach sometimes in my practice where I'm in thinking mode, in this thinking complex of thought around it, rather than just surrender and just moving into the depths of it. And sometimes that's challenging for me.
When you're in the thinking mode, how do you proceed from there?
Through thought.
Yes, but it's not satisfactory, so how do you proceed? To rise higher, what do you do?
Sometimes I just give up and then move out of it and then come back later, and I can move through it.
Is that a dependable method?
No, I guess I want to know when I face that, how to move through it.
If we just give up, even if we style that giving up with an eloquent, more spiritual sounding term, if we just give up, what in effect we are doing is we're just allowing the mind to wander on, and the mind in its wandering will, in the course of time, abandon whatever it was thinking about. It's the old monkey in the tree, hops from one limb to another, it abandons one limb, grabs another. Of course, if you observe monkeys for a while, they do wind up in the same tree again.
Took a few pictures.
So, it's not a dependable method. If it is truly surrender, the mind itself, one's ownership of the mind, is relinquished. Or if it is truly inquiry, one finds out for whom is all this thinking, and finds his existence to be thought-free. Yes, there's no such thing as a bad inquiry, nor is there really any failure in the spiritual practice, because the goal is not an objective thing to be attained elsewhere, as it were. We could go further with this. Any aspect of spiritual practice is never in vain. Even the least effort applied bears fruit. Nothing wrong or bad can happen as a result of this.
Sometimes when I go into the I, and I'm at that point where I'm inquiring and I'm penetrating into that I, the thought comes, or conception, okay, now, am I to identify with the I that is the true I, or just keep going deeper into the I, that it is the I, the false I, or the I, ego I, or the I which is falsely identified. And sometimes it seems if I, remember the truths that you always are teaching about who we are, then I'll fall into that, which is beyond the misidentification or I, that I, and I move into the bliss.
So bliss is where the multiplicity of eyes is relinquished. whether it's in the context of recalling some instruction or otherwise, the inquiry should be carried on until the false idea of multiple eyes is dissolved.
With persistence.
Yes, be persistent. You can never persevere too intensely or for too long. Perseverance is worthwhile. It overcomes the inertia of the old ignorance.
So when I reach that point, rather than becoming frustrated or attempting to wanting to have a quick experience of bliss out of this thought complex, rather just stay present to it, stay with the inquiry.
Anytime you want to move into greater freedom and bliss, simply determine some misidentification, even if it's in the form of some attachment, or it can be something more subtle, and destroy it.
So
Your own bliss, your own freedom is obscured only by the presence of your own misidentifications or attachments, vasanas. Find a vasana and destroy it. Destroy it by knowing it as a tendency and knowing that it has nothing to do with your happiness or the reality of yourself.
in other words, see in that moment what vasana is there present, and then move deeper into that.
You won't have to move deeper. Just examine it and destroy it, and what remains over spontaneously, naturally by itself, without further effort at that point, will itself be blissful and be shining of the nature of truth.
Thank you.
You don't have to navigate. It may appear at present that you're navigating between states, higher and lower. But the real essence of such navigation is simply to destroy the very building blocks of what constitutes the lower or the bound state. Then the substrate, which was previously regarded as the higher state, alone remains. Okay, Shanti. Last question.
Friday was a very wonderful satsang, at least in my understanding, and we discussed some cases where the description of the state of the practitioner was not as accurate as the actual experience in depth and ongoingness and clarity of what was generally experienced. And so that a higher description was actually in order. Have I understood correctly to this point?
Maybe you could explain a little bit more what you're trying to describe.
What impressed me was that it seemed that what one truly lives by and feeling one has understood, whether one labels it or not, or puts a name to it or not, it is the direct experience and clarity that is the criteria of where one actually is.
Yes, that matters much more. That's the substance, what one's actual experience.
Okay.
That's one's knowledge.
Yes.
That's one's advancement.
Yes.
The descriptions of it, the massive advertising campaign for discussion purposes among friends and relations, etc., really is of no consequence.
So that one's experience is one's real standing.
That's right.
And one's understanding is the same, has to be the same thing, and one's life has to be the same thing. And when it is the same, then actually the aspirant, the so-called aspirant, has actually reached a higher place than was previously understood.
That's right. And in the course of such aspiration, in the course of such practice, if there is higher or deep experience, and there is also times when the experience is not as high or not as deep, then it's incumbent upon that seeker to discern that occurrence. This is not as high as this. Compare and contrast and examine what makes the difference. The difference will always be a matter of what you're taking on falsely as identity, or what you really know to be your identity.
Right.
Then inquiry is in order right there, and what was previously the lower state dissolves.
Develop?
Dissolves.
Oh, dissolve. Sure. Yes.
So the honest examination of oneself, the recognition of this I actually experience, this I experience sometimes, this I don't really quite experience at all, or whatever the case may be. That is always worthwhile. It's not for evaluation purposes. I'm a high being, I'm a low being. That's all egotistical. It's only for the purpose of discerning how and in what ways one's experience can be elevated to the absolute.
Could you repeat that?
This examination is not for the silly purpose of evaluating, I'm a high being, I'm a low being, I'm a greater being than so-and-so is, or such and such. That would be all foolishness and egotistical. The examination is not for that kind of evaluation. The examination is only for the purposes of discerning what one's actual experience is and in what ways it can be made to merge with the absolute. Such honest self-appraisal is a very beneficial thing to have.
Right. So one's own clarity in what do I understand, what is always clear to me, what do I actually live, these are all entering into that evaluation.
Exactly so. So when you know something, this is the truth, this is really the truth for me all the time, yet what you're calling living, what I'm experiencing, if they don't match 100%, this prompts us then to examine our experience in more detail and to see what are the factors that cause our experience to be more limited than what we know to be the eternal truth. And we go on examining and then thereupon inquiring until every last tendency, everything that separates the life's experience from that absolute has been dissolved.
So the recognition of every area of stability in the living of all relative points is actually the decisive factor.
And the practical application for most time, there's no ironclad rule in this, but for most time, that which will be most beneficial for the aspirant is the perception of where it is not stable. Because where it is already stable, we know that already by direct experience. That is self-evident. Merely to think it over again will not add anything to our experience. But if we can discern where darkness still seems to be in the midst of light, then it's eliminated.
So in that context, the self-evaluation, ongoing self-evaluation and self-examination is actually of great importance.
Yes.
To gauge the path and to gauge one's progress and to gauge one's own standing. Where am I now?
How else to destroy the vasanas or the tendencies manifesting in the life unless we first honestly recognize these are occurring even though we know better? And then inquire.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it was very wonderful satsang. It felt very relieving and releasing, and it was there was a new insight of that deep knowing and deep clarity were actually equal to realization.
That is so.
शास्त्र संजन संपर्क वैराग्याभ्यासरूपिणी प्रथमा भूमिकैषोक्ता मुमुक्षुत्वप्रदायिनी.
Being in contact with virtuous, wise people and the scriptures, and practice in the form of detachment, is the first stage to master, which is said to bestow the state of desire for liberation.
Vicharana dvitiya syat, tritiya sangha bhavana, vilayini chaturthi syat, vasana vilayatmika.
The second is inquiry. The third is meditation, bhavana, with its limbs or with supplementary practices. The fourth is dissolution, of the nature of dissolution of vasanas, tendencies.
Shuddha samvinmayananda rupa bhavati panchami artha sukta prabuddhabho jivan muktotra tishtati.
The fifth is of the nature of awareness, knowledge, of the form, nature of bliss. It resembles being half asleep and half awake. Here, the one who is liberated in life, Jivamukta, stands.
Asamvedana rupa cha shashti bhavati bhumika anande kadhanakara sushuptas sadrishi sthitihi.
And in the form of non-perception is the sixth stage, abidance in the form of a solid mass of bliss that resembles deep sleep.
Turyavasthopashanta sa muktireva hi kevala samata swachhata saumya saptami bhumika bhavet.
The quiescent fourth state is certainly liberation, indeed, alone. In equipoise, very transparent, gentle, auspicious, happy, and of the nature of soma, it shall be the seventh stage.
Turyatita tuyavastha paranirvana rupini saptami sa para praudha vishayo naiva jivatam.
But the beyond the fourth is the supreme, the highest state of the nature of nirvana. It is the supreme, fully grown, which is not indeed the sphere of the individual living being.
Purvavasthatrayam tatra jagradityeva samsthitam chaturthi swapna ityukta swapnabham yatra vai jagat.
The previous three states' abidance is thus there in the waking state alone. The fourth is said to be a dream, thus, for it is where the world is certainly a dream appearance.
Anandaikadhanakara sushuptakhyatu panchami asamvedana rupatu shashti tudyapadabhita.
Now the fifth, of the form of a singular mass of bliss, is called deep sleep. Now the sixth, which is of a non-perceivable nature, is named the fourth state.
Tuhyatita padavastha saptami bhumikottama mano vachobhiragrahya swaprakasha sadatmika.
The state of beyond the fourth state is the seventh, the highest stage. Ungraspable by the mind and speech, it is ever of the nature of the self-luminous.
Antapratyahridi-vasha chaityam chenapibhavitam mukta eva na sandeho mahasamataya taya.
If withdrawn within and removed in this manner, what has caused the thin individual soul to appear is not. By his great equipoise, one is a liberated one, no doubt.